previous webinars presented by the GREAT Group, we explored the question, is graduate school right for me? And talked about getting ready for your PhD. Among other things, we discussed biomedical research and career opportunities. Biomedical scientists use the power of research to understand and cure human disease. There are many ways biomedical research is conducted. For example, as shown in the figure, one can approach biomedical science from the physical sciences, or from the biological sciences, or even a combination in the field of biophysics. Research in many biomedical sciences is oriented towards curing specific diseases, such as diabetes or Alzheimer's disease. Some, especially MD PhDs, actually study human subjects, taking a patient-oriented approach to their research. There are growing opportunities for people trained in quantitative science who conduct research using statistical, mathematical, or computational techniques. All of these approaches and others are aimed at improving the health and well-being of people. So how do you get involved in biomedical research? There are many opportunities for involvement at all levels. Most people who are directing, leading, and planning research in biomedical science have either a PhD, a doctorate in philosophy, or a dual degree in medicine and a PhD. This webinar series is aimed at helping you understand the career opportunities and learning how to take this career pathway. Why do people choose to get their PhD or MD PhD? Of course, there are many reasons. A PhD or MD PhD really becomes a leading expert in their field, not just on a local level, but nationally or even internationally. In the process of earning your degree, you'll have the opportunity to learn not only from faculty, but from your fellow students. You will take interesting and challenging coursework and learn how to do creative and impactful research. And you will learn to make your research translational, so that basic and clinical research has an impact on patient care and outcomes. What should you look for in a graduate program? Many programs are organized in one of two ways. Departmental programs are housed in biomedical research departments, such as the Department of Biochemistry or the Department of Pharmacology. Umbrella programs cut across departmental lines and are often more interdisciplinary. Many programs are a blend of these two. Students start off with broad biomedical training for a year or two, and as they progress and become interested in a particular research area, they choose a basic or clinical science discipline or department to specialize in. A unique aspect of training in biomedical research is the availability of funding to support the student while they're in training. We're talking about paying you as you go to school here. There's a lot to find out about potential programs. You should look into what research opportunities exist. Do the faculty collaborate within or across departments or across institutions? And what do current students think about their program? And for MD, PhD students, candidates, take a look at the breadth and variety of clinical experiences available. So, you've decided you might want to sign up for a graduate program and get training in biomedical science to earn your PhD or your MD PhD. What can you do to prepare yourself and give yourself a competitive edge to get into such a program? What are the admission committees looking for? Well, they're largely looking for someone who knows what they are getting into, who has experienced research at some level, and is a strong science student who is objective, honest, and has sound principles, can communicate effectively, can integrate information from many sources, and is able to work with others in a team setting. So a major goal for you is to have some sort of substantive research experience. Keep in mind that any research experience will help, but more is always better. Admissions committees are hoping you will have participated in summer research, such as SURF or SERP programs. One summer program is good, more is even better. Have you taken advantage of conducting a senior research project or an honors research project and preparing a write-up and/or a presentation? If you didn't have an opportunity to conduct research while an undergraduate, you could consider getting a job in a research laboratory to bolster your credentials. Such an experience will likely get you some good letters of recommendation. These experiences should help you understand what a hypothesis is and how one goes about testing a hypothesis. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Sherilyn Black from Duke University School of Medicine, who will be taking you through part of the application process and introduce you to the personal statement.
Thank you very much, Dave. So there are many things that you should think about as you are preparing to apply for graduate school. The first thing before you write your application is to really immerse yourself in the scientific literature. There are lots of things going on in science that are very exciting and that might be drawing you to want to get a degree in the MD or PhD program, but really sinking your teeth into the literature will help the admissions committees to know that you understand the most salient questions that are existing in science today. The next thing would be try to attend a research conference or two. This will help you to not only meet other peers at your same training level who are applying to graduate school, but also to meet senior scientists who have been doing this for a long time and can provide you with a lot of exciting information and resources about applying to graduate school and form important mentor-mentee relationships. The next thing is to network. Obviously, you can network at conferences, you can network at your home institution, you can network through professional societies. Anything you can do to meet other scientists, interact with them, and get your name out there and learn from them is very important. The next thing is to make the most of your mentor relationships. When you're applying to graduate schools, letters of recommendation are critically important. So it's highly relevant for you to have very strong relationships with mentors and make sure that not only are you really utilizing their knowledge base, but also that you as the mentee are really contributing to what the relationship is. And finally, really make sure you understand the PhD and MD PhD application process. Sit down with the trusted advisor or faculty member and ask them if they can make sure they really assist you in learning about the application process and what's required. So there are several things that the application consists of. The first is demographic data, which is basically your information that sort of tells who you are very basically on paper. The next is your transcript with your grades. The next is GRE or MCAT scores. The next, letters of recommendation, which we know are very important, and also a CV or resume, depending on your institution, that will determine which of those you need. The statements that you need for graduate school can vary institution to institution, but typically we're looking at a personal statement, a research statement, and a statement of purpose. Some schools combine all three of these statements together into one large statement, and some look for three individual statements. So you'll really need to read the application to make sure you know what your specific institution is asking for. So why do we need to write personal statements in the admissions process? The first thing that's most important is it's really the admissions committee's opportunity to meet you, to learn who you are and what makes you unique and sets you apart. You know, all PhD and MD PhD programs typically fully fund students. So we really need to think about, why should a school want to invest in you? What are you bringing to the table that sets you apart from other applicants? This might seem like it's something that's not as important, but it really does show that you can follow instructions and provide the information the committee is looking for. If specific things are asked for you of specific institutions, make sure you put those in those applications. A lot of you will be applying to many different institutions, and there will be lots of information that you're sort of putting from one application to the other, but really make sure that you are respecting the rules of that institution and you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's appropriately. And the final thing is, it gives us a chance to see that you can express yourself clearly and concisely in writing. Writing is extremely important for scientists to master, and the way that you write your personal statement will really set the stage for the way that the rest of your application is reviewed. So the personal statement introduces you to the admissions committee, both as a scientist and holistically as a person. It's really important that as you're writing this statement, you think about what is it about you personally that has led to your decision to become a scientist. Many times a mistake I see students make is that they will sort of regurgitate information from their research project in their personal statement. If the research project has influenced you personally, that is fine, but a lot of times what we're looking for is who you are and what makes you tick and what are you excited about and how these things contribute to your strength and value as a scientist. The most important thing that we're looking for throughout the entire application is a passion for science. We really want to make sure that you know what it's going to mean to be a graduate student and you really get a sense of what science is all about. So a couple of examples. When you're writing a research statement, for instance, or if you have a personal statement that incorporates the research statement, it's really important to not just give the punchline of what your results were, but to talk about what was your experience like in the labs that you worked in? What did you learn? What was challenging? How did you grow from that? You know, a couple of things listed here are frustrations when your reagents don't arrive or if your mice die unexpectedly. When you deal with things like this, it's really important to think about how did you overcome it, what did you learn from it, and how will it affect your science moving forward. You also want to talk about what were the great eureka moments during your research where you really found out that you loved what you were doing and that you were really growing and that you were furthering the scientific field that you're studying. So talk about that. What made you excited? Why was that something that really made you decide that this was going to be your life's vocation? Make sure that you really address all of those questions as you are writing your statements. The next thing is you can really get a chance to highlight many different areas of your life in the personal statement. So the first thing is you get to highlight the parts of the application that you want to stress. Now this obviously primarily needs to be about your research experience because again, that is the most important part of the application. But maybe you're really proud of the fact that you got an A in a really tough class, or maybe you're really proud of the fact that you overcame a personal obstacle in your life and you still did well in school. Or maybe something that happened to you personally through someone that you know led to your desire to do research. Really highlight those things. And you know, if you had a great experience in a class of one of your recommenders, you might want to talk about the influence that had, and then that will, you know, sort of direct the admissions committee to look more closely at that letter of recommendation. So highlighting is key. The next thing is it allows you to appear as a person rather than a set of numbers. So this will allow you to say, this is my GPA and these are my GRE scores or MCAT scores. Yes, but this is who I am and this is how these scores make sense in context of the rest of my life. So it really helps you to explain your grades, explain your scores, explain how and why those might or might not be important to your overall scientific development. And I mentioned this earlier, but really work to set yourself apart from other applicants. What makes you unique? What is it about you that should make me want to be excited about training you in my lab? And then also convince the committee that you're a good match for the program. This is very important because, again, a lot of students apply to many different schools and will like to use the same application materials for different schools. Look up things about the actual program that you're applying to. Look at how they train students, how the classes are structured. Mention why those things are a good fit for you specifically. Let them know you did your research and really take the time to really make sure that your statement matches the institution you're applying to. So the thing that I think a lot of students don't realize is that the personal statement is not easy to write. A lot of people leave this until the very end because they're really worried about writing up their research statement. But the reality is this statement is really the best shot at getting a holistic snapshot of who you are to the admissions committee. So that means you need to start early. Write an outline of what the statement's going to be to make sure you cover all of the points the application request. Make sure that any instructions are followed. Make sure that you touch on all the areas that you think are really important for the institution to know about you. You should write drafts of the information about yourself you want to cover personally and also your research. A lot of times you can have really bad writer's block when you're writing about your research for the first time. Just work to get something down on paper and then show it to someone who's read a lot of applications, who's sat on an admissions committee, and ask them for their honest feedback so that you can do a lot of editing. And then that goes into rewriting and refining. Give yourself time to understand that you will have many rounds of editing this statement. This is an incredibly important step in your life, and you need to give it the respect that it deserves. So really start early and make sure you do it as well as you can. And next, I will turn it over to Nancy Street to take on the next part of this presentation.
Thanks, Sherilyn. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you about what you have just heard is probably one of the most important parts of your application to a PhD or an MD PhD program. And so we want to break down what should be included in your personal statement by going through a sample personal statement. So what should your personal statement look like? Well, the very first paragraph should talk about your interest in science and give examples on how your interest in science developed. So this might be an interest that you developed in childhood. It might be something that came to you while you were a college student undergoing your first research experience. For each of you, the story will be very different. But you want to make that opening paragraph one that captivates the reader, engages them, and gives them the desire to read more of your personal statement. As everyone has mentioned, your personal statement is an opportunity for you to paint a picture of who you are and for the reviewers to develop an interest in having you in their graduate program. So that first paragraph is like the first impression that you will make in your application, and so you want to give it great attention. What about the rest of the personal statement? Well, for every research experience that you have taken a part in, you should have a complete paragraph that summarizes that research experience. What do I mean by summarizing it? Well, you definitely should mention whose lab and what institution you did that research at. And you should also give the approximate dates or length of time that you were in that research experience. Then you want to begin to introduce the research topic. So basically you want to tell the reader what's important about the research that you did. And you want to tell them this at several levels. You want to definitely give them the big picture of the research so they know what context your individual project lies in. Then you want to move from the big picture of the research to the hypothesis of the experiments that you actually carried out yourself. You also want to talk about your specific role in the project. And this should include your intellectual role as well as the technical role that you played in completing the project. And finally, you want to summarize the outcomes from the work that you did while in this particular research experience. And outcomes can mean many things. Outcomes can be the results of the experiments and the answer to the hypothesis that you were posing. It can mean an abstract that you wrote and submitted to a meeting or a retreat. It can mean a presentation that you made, either oral or written. And if you're very, very lucky, it can mean publications that resulted from the work that you did. So every paragraph that you write about a research experience should have a beginning and an end. And it definitely should communicate the science at the 10,000-foot level, as well as the science at the 100-foot level, which is what you did on a day-to-day basis. Now, you might wonder why admissions committees are interested in knowing about the 10,000-foot level of a research project. And the reason is, it's a very good reflection of the curiosity of the scientists involved if they can talk about the context of the research that they are doing, what the context is. And it also is very impressive if at the end of a paragraph that you write about your research, you talk about what experiments might or will or could come next. This also is a reflection of your intellectual engagement in the project. So if you've had 3 separate research experiences, perhaps one at your undergraduate campus, one during the summer, maybe one as a post-bac at an institution, then you would want to have at least 3 paragraphs describing each of those research experiences. And then typically, the last paragraph of your personal statement would is where you would explain why you are interested in a particular institution that you are applying to. And within that institution, what specific programs are you interested in? So you will have to do some research, as was mentioned earlier, and see what is unique about the program that you are applying to at that institution, and then talk about why you are a good match for that program. It's also a plus if you have time to delve deeply enough that you can identify specific faculty that you might want to work with once you are at that institution. So those are sort of the skeleton of what a personal statement looks like. Now, depending on what an institution asks, their application may be set up so that the personal statement includes both your statement of purpose and your research statement, or they may be separate. So, as was mentioned earlier, the first thing you want to do is read the application directions very carefully. Every application is different, and so you want to, before you begin putting pen to paper for a particular institution, check once, twice, and again to make sure that you know what that particular institution is looking for. And when we say that each application is different, for every personal statement or research statement, there may be specific prompts that that school is having in their essay, and they are going to expect that you will answer the questions that they ask. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you start from scratch for every personal statement or research statement that you write, but you do want to take your main essay that you have worked very hard to write, your main personal statement, and then you may need to customize it for the different institutions that you are applying to. As we've said also, not all personal statements are created equal, and here we want to emphasize that if you are applying to PhD as well as MD PhD programs, or MD PhD and MD programs, or if you're applying to a summer program, that they will be asking for different responses or different subjects or different types of criteria that they will want to know your answer to. So read the essay prompts very carefully and make sure that you are answering the questions, because that is what the admissions committee will be looking for and wanting to see. I also want to remind you that your personal statement or research and personal statement is only one part of your complete application to all of these types of programs. Story. One thing you should keep in mind when you're writing your application is when these statements are submitted, they're going to be read by many different admission committees, and the members of those admissions committees are reading dozens, if not hundreds, of applications. And often, because everyone is busy, this reading happens late at night. So you want to do everything you can to make it easy for them to read your statement. And what types of things can you do? Well, you definitely want to make sure that your statement is very readable. So do not try and use a very small font to fit more in. You should at least use a 12-point font and make sure that your statement is formatted in a way that's very easy to read. You also want your statement to be relevant and well organized. And so by making an outline initially that has a great flow to it, where you start with who you are and then walk through your research experiences and then end with a summary paragraph, this is the type of flow that an admissions committee would expect, and it makes it easy for them to read your statement. You should also work very hard to connect your paragraphs to one another. Use an introductory statement and a summary sentence in each paragraph as much as possible. And you should be very careful to avoid what we are calling here is gimmicks. X when you begin your essay or during your essay. So sometimes as an undergraduate, you might have written a statement where you started with a particular quote, or you might have used a theme throughout your statement that connects the points from one to another. For admissions into PhD and MD PhD programs in the sciences, we're not looking for that type of approach. We're looking for an earnest, well-organized, straightforward statement that talks about the science that you have been involved in. And so you want to get the reader's attention by the content that you put in, but not in a gimmicky way. Now, some of you might be sitting there thinking, I'm very passionate about science. I know that I want to get into a PhD or an MD PhD program, but I'm worried about some aspect of my personal history. You may have had some struggles or challenges. Perhaps your GPA isn't as high as you would like it to be. Perhaps you've run into some personal challenges, maybe health issues during your undergraduate career or during your post-bac years. Perhaps you have struggled with financial issues while an undergraduate student. Well, it's very important that if any of these types of struggles or challenges have impacted what your application looks like, that you write about these in your personal statement. You want to be brief, you want to give an explanation as appropriate, but you don't want this to be the major part of your application. So let me give you one example. Perhaps one semester you became ill, maybe you had mono, and it dramatically impacted your grades in that particular semester. Then you should simply state that in your first or maybe the beginning of your second paragraph of your personal statement. You shouldn't think of this as making an excuse. It is very helpful to the reviewers to know what caused this drop in your GPA in what was likely otherwise a very strong undergraduate academic performance. Same is to be said for financial struggles. If you are a person who had to work throughout your undergraduate career, and this impacted the amount of time that you could invest in studying and doing research, you should mention that in your essay as well. If you have some bumps in the road, it is our advice that you mention those to your recommenders in case they don't know that, so that they can also comment on these challenges when they write your letters of recommendation. And in fact, a really good idea is to give your recommenders a copy of your personal statement, even if it's only a draft, so that they can see exactly what it is you're writing and they can enhance or verify or illuminate even further things that they see in your personal statement. Now, there are some things outside of the content that the admissions committee will absolutely expect. So we will expect that you have carefully edited your personal statement and that spelling is corrected completely. And this is where it's very important to ask other people to help you read your personal statement and reread it, because something that you become very familiar with, your eyes see words and spellings that might not actually be there, and so you need a pair of outside eyes to help you check your spelling as well as grammar and sentence construction. So it is very impressive when these things are in place, and it is not impressive when there are spelling errors or grammatical errors or poorly written paragraphs. And so definitely start early and make sure you have time to take care of those types of issues with your essay. You also want to have time to make sure your writing is clear and concise, and it is a mixture of long and short sentences, which makes it more enjoyable to read, and it enhances the flow of the essay. Another aspect of grammar is to use good vocabulary and use it properly throughout your essay. And so those are all language dynamics and issues that you want to make sure that other people have a say in those aspects of your personal statement. It will enhance the quality of your personal statement greatly. We also expect that your essay will be completely honest. We want you to definitely outline your previous experiences, but we don't expect them to be exaggerated. And finally, a mistake that we see on occasion is someone will personalize their particular essay for one specific school, and then they'll make the mistake of sending that essay to a different school. So if you mention the name of a school in your personal statement, make sure that you send that statement to the right school. Also remember that everything you write in your personal statement will be what will be discussed with you when you are granted an interview at an institution. So once you have interviews in hand, you will definitely want to pull out your personal statement for that particular school and reread it. You want to read it out loud so that you can be sure you hear what you have written there and that you understand what it is you wrote and be prepared to discuss it in greater detail. Keep in mind that anything you put in your written statement will be fair game for an interview question when you actually go to an interview. So make sure that before you hit the submit button, you read the essay again with the interview in mind and make sure you are comfortable about everything that you've written in your essay. We've mentioned throughout this talk that writing a personal statement is critically important and that you can ask people for help in making your personal statement the best that it can be. So you might be wondering, who is it that I could ask? Well, you definitely could talk to directors of programs that you have been a part of, as well as mentors who have mentored you in scientific environments, either during summer programs or at your home institution if you've done research on your home campus. Additionally, you could talk to professors and heads of labs and department chairs. All of these people have gone through the same application process for either PhD or MD PhD programs, and so they are well versed in writing statements and reading other people's statements and offering feedback on those. Another great group of people to ask are graduate and MD PhD students and postdoctoral trainees in labs that you have been in. So don't hesitate to ask them for their feedback on your personal statement. I have found that graduate students and MD PhD students and postdocs love to mentor and teach, and so give them an opportunity to help you make a really incredible personal statement. Then you also could go to your career advising offices. And finally, when you interact with PhD and MD PhD program directors and administrators, know that those people are also very often willing to read personal statements and offer feedback in advance of you applying to their program. Don't hesitate to ask for help on reviewing your personal statement. I have met many students who have sent me their statements, and I am happy to read them. And I've met other students who are hesitant to send it because they're concerned that the quality of the writing isn't great or the summary of the research isn't great. Don't worry about that. Send it to people and let them give you their feedback, and they will be happy to point out, oh, you need to expand this section, or your research experiences are too technique-oriented. Put more thoughts in there about the science that you were involved with. So do not ever hesitate to ask for help on your personal statement. Okay, this wraps up the slides that we have about the personal statement. But if you would like additional information on submitting applications to PhD or MD PhD programs, any of the 3 websites here will be very helpful to you. And so I encourage you to check those out. I'm now going to turn the presentation back to Dr. Friedman, who will lead us in our question and answer period. Oh, before I do, I'd like to acknowledge that these presentation slides were prepared by Drs. Joel Oppenheim and Victoria Friedman, and thank you to them for sharing these. So now Victoria is going to take over.
Hello again. As you can see, the personal statement really requires thoughtfulness and preparation and planning, and most of all, time. So it's not too early to begin, and that's the most important thing that we wanted to communicate in this webinar. We have gone over many details about the personal statement, and no doubt you've been worried about trying to write everything down. So I wanted to assure you that all of these slides will be available to you to review and to go over again. They will be on the NRMN website very shortly. In addition, we have time now to answer some of your questions, and I see that some of you have been typing in questions here. Please use the panel on the right side of your screen and type in any questions that you have, and we're happy to answer them. Okay, so the first question I have is about the ideal length of the personal statement. And I'm wondering if Dr. Wessinger, if you could answer that question.
I think something in the neighborhood of 2 pages would be appropriate. You don't want to overburden the reviewer by making him read an excessive amount, but it might have to be quite variable depending on what your message is. So I would try to keep it short, keep it on point, but you need to cover all the points that were mentioned in this webinar.
That's great, and I think that's important. So say what you need to say, but you needn't write a novel. We have another question about whether or not it's necessary to mention individual faculty in the statement, that is, the faculty with whom you would like to work. Dr. Black, can you give us your opinion on that?
Yes, I think if you have individual faculty that you're interested in working with, you should definitely mention them in the essay. That not only lets the institution know that you spent significant time adequately researching the program and looking up the different people that are there, but then when you come for your interview, if you're chosen to be interviewed on campus, you'll likely get a chance to meet with those specific faculty while you're there. So I really encourage you to list specific faculty if you see names that work for you. And also, it just lets the institution know sort of what your global interests are, and I think that that makes a big difference in helping them to see how you might fit in their research program.
Great. We have some questions about MD, PhD programs. So I wanted to remind everyone that you can find a great deal of information about MD, PhD programs on the AAMC website. So that is aamc.org. And if you go in through the student portal and you look for MD, PhD programs, that will open up a whole series of web pages that describe the programs, that give you links to individual programs, and that help you negotiate the MD, PhD application process. And we have one question relevant to the statements that you need to write in the MD, PhD application. The question is, do you have to talk about your research experience in your personal statements in an MD or an MD, PhD application? So do we have some opinions on that? Okay, Dr. Wessinger?
It's probably less important in a MD application, but the MD applications at many institutions are linked to the MD, PhD applications if you're going through the AMCAS application system. Not every institution uses that, but most of them do. By far, most of them do. And so if you want to do an MD, PhD application, it's as simple as clicking a box, and that opens up 2 new essay areas. And one of them is for you to review your research experience, and then the other is for you to explain what your your personal goals are and why you want to pursue a career as a physician scientist. So, but if you're applying for an MD, and you have research experience, and especially if it was significant for you, I think you should go ahead and mention it somewhere in your MD application, because I certainly don't think it would hurt your application for medical school.
Yes, and I would probably just add to that. I know specifically where I am at Duke, it's a very research-focused MD program, and so I totally agree with Dave. The more that you talk about research in an MD application, the more compatible you would be with our specific system. So that again goes back to sort of understanding where you're applying and what they're looking for. But I completely agree with him. It's very much dependent on MD versus MD PhD, and then the institution that you're applying to.
Good. So we have a question about the specific details in the personal statement that refer to the organization. Do the topics in the second and continuing paragraphs need to be in the order stated on the slides, or can this be changed around? And Dr. Street, perhaps you would comment on the suggested order of topics?
So I think that the way that we outlined them in the presentation is fairly typical, where you have an introductory paragraph that kind of talks about who you are and what's bringing you to science, followed by one or more paragraphs that summarize each of your research experiences, and then ending with why you're interested in that particular program. But that's not a hard and fast rule. And so as long as your essay is organized and flows well, then I have seen other excellent essays that had a different order of those particular components. Most typically, that is what we see, however.
Right. So I think the most important point here may not necessarily be the order, but that the essay holds together and that it flows from one paragraph to the next. I think that's the most important thing. Okay, so we have some additional questions. So another student has asked whether we can give examples of how to address a school-specific question. So do any of your applications have school-specific questions for which you're looking for answers in the personal statement? Let's start with Dr. Black.
So I know that one specific type of school-specific question that comes up quite a bit, and I wouldn't even say this was just for Duke, I think this happens across the board, is there are different types of admissions systems. So some are, everyone goes through an umbrella program, and then from there you disseminate out into different departments. For some, you apply to different departments and programs directly. And so a lot of times there might be specific questions on an application about, you know, why an umbrella program, you know, system is a better fit for you than maybe one where you apply to a direct department. Or if you are applying to an umbrella program, then you might have to sort of identify in some sort of rank order which departments you think you would end up affiliating with. So that's an example of something that varies from institution to institution, where you would just need to really understand the way that the admission structure of the school is set up. I know at Duke specifically, even though our students are in the School of Medicine for basic science PhD programs, you still have to apply through the graduate school. And so the graduate school may have a set of questions that may not seem like they're particularly relevant to a science department, but it's because that's just the way our applications are processed. So again, it just goes back to really carefully reading the instructions, and if you have questions, asking for help.
Yeah, I think the most critical thing, and actually one of the most challenging aspects of a PhD or an MD PhD application, is reading the instructions. So one size does not fit all, and you need to carefully follow the instructions and the questions for each application, and this takes time. And that's why we recommend starting as early as possible. So we have another question where a student writes, I am having a difficult time getting started with my personal statement. Can you provide some advice? I have an outline, but I just can't seem to write my first sentence. So, Dr. Wessinger, do you have some suggestions? I'm sure all of our panelists will have a suggestion.
Well, I've read a lot of personal statements, but I haven't written very many of them. I understand how this might be very difficult. But I think you're approaching it right, that having an outline is a good first step. It would seem to me like you might start with Roman numeral number 1 on your outline and write a paragraph about it. But Sherilyn, do you have any other comments or
Yeah.
Nancy?
You know, I'm a big fan of giving myself internal deadlines to force myself to get over writer's block. This happens, even as a faculty member, I think everybody else will agree when you're writing a paper, you're writing a grant, you can hit writer's block at any stage of your career, so you are not alone with whoever wrote this question. But I would say give yourself a deadline. And it might seem arbitrary to others, but for you, you should say, by next Wednesday of next week, you will have a paragraph written, and have someone to hold you accountable to that deadline. It might be somebody who's in a class with you or in your lab, but really, if you're someone who has a hard time sort of self-initiating with writing, I think having other people who can hold you accountable, or other people who might also be applying to graduate school and going through the same process, anything to sort of give you some accountability to not let you just stay stalled, because I agree with Dave, it's one of those things where by the time you perfect writing a personal statement, you never have to do it again. So it's a really frustrating process that it's this really tough thing of getting it going, and then once you figure out how to do it and you can write it well, it's sort of over with. So getting other people to sort of help to keep pushing you forward is always a good thing.
Dr. Street, do you have some suggestions?
I do. I have some additional thoughts on that. I think those are all great pieces of advice, but I have a different tactic that I use to trick myself into writing. If the start is hard, I skip the first paragraph. And in this particular instance, perhaps it would be much easier to start on paragraph number 2, which is about the first research experience that you're going to write about. Perhaps you've already written about it in some other context. Maybe you've written an abstract, and so you'll have a start there. Just move to a section of the personal statement that doesn't seem as torturous to you. Mm-hmm. And once you write that first science paragraph, then perhaps you'll write the second science paragraph. The other way I trick myself into writing is I think of it as writing a story. So all of us, if we're talking, can tell a story. So just pretend you're talking and then write the words down when you get to a difficult part that you're kind of stuck on. Getting those words on the paper moves you from a very difficult spot to a much easier spot. It moves you from writing to editing. And editing is always easier. Not only for you, but it gives you the opportunity to hand it to someone else, and they can give you input as well.
Great. I think these are terrific ideas. Dave, did you have anything else to offer?
I was just going to add to that point. I think that's a very good, that last point that Nancy made is a very good point. Sometimes if you just talk with somebody about what you're trying to say and then listen to yourself and write that down, that's often the best way to say it.
Yep.
I have a grant writing course, and I'll have this convoluted paragraph where we just can't seem to figure out what in the world the student's trying to say, and we'll just say, well, what are you trying to say here? And they can express what they want to say very clearly and vocally. And I say, now just write that down.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. So remember that the personal statement is really telling a story. So just tell the story and write down the way you would tell it to a friend. And that's a great place to get started.
Yeah.
And that is a perfect segue to our next question, which has to do with a question about research. So what can I write about if I've only had one summer project? Dr. Street?
Well, you definitely can write about that summer project, and you have the luxury of writing about it in greater detail than someone who's going to have to fit in 2 or 3 or 4 research experiences in their essays. So if you've just had one summer experience, it will be very important that you write enough to show the person reading it that you understand the big picture of the research going on in that lab and how the project that you worked on fit into that big picture, as well as talk about your project in more detail, the role that you played, how you were intellectually engaged, and then you'll have time to elaborate on the outcomes of your work and talk about in greater depth what should happen next. What would you do if you were continuing in that lab and had more time to do research? I am going to say if you've had only one summer research experience, you may find it challenging to be competitive for some graduate schools where the expectation is there will be considerable research experience. I am not saying it's impossible to effectively apply and get into graduate school with a single summer research experience, but I would suggest that you apply broadly to many schools. And perhaps you have some undergraduate research experience during the school year. If that's the case, I would certainly write about those as robust research experiences as well.
Sounds
I
like
think
great
if that
advice.
one experience was the experience that captured your imagination about research, perhaps you could express, your excitement about research from the basis of that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and something that I would add is I'm never a fan of applications that I feel like are sort of apologizing for or, downing the fact that they don't have multiple experiences. I very much agree with what Nancy said. Take what you have and sell it. Dave is right. If that research experience is what made you say, I want to do this for the rest of my life, then write that down and make it compelling. I think that, I know there are some students who have applied to graduate school and don't have a lot of research experience. And at that point, what it's really going to come down to are two things, in my opinion. The first one is for you to determine if you really feel like you actually have a clear understanding of what it will take to be a grad student, if you're ready. And if you decide that maybe you'd like a little more experience, there are great post-bac programs and things of that nature that you can do to bolster your CV and to get more experience on the ground. But if it was a very intensive experience where somehow you really believe that, it was enough, then I think, really making sure you clearly explain why this was, the experience of a lifetime, what you contributed intellectually to the project, what the future directions should be, and why you believe that this one experience got you through to be ready for graduate school. And I agree, if there's any opportunity that you have at your undergraduate institution to follow up with more work in labs there during the school year, anything would be better in terms of, continuing to add more research experience on. And I think anything would be helpful in that area.
Yes, I think that this is very wise advice. So we have another question from a student. Is it okay to ask my faculty advisor to read my statement and critique it? So Nancy Street, do you want to give us your opinion about this?
Yes, I would say they would be an excellent person to ask. If by faculty advisor you mean the person you're currently doing research with, then they will certainly have a great depth of knowledge about the science that you've written. If by faculty advisor, this is the person who guides you through the coursework that you're doing, he or she will still have potentially great advice because at one point in time that faculty member applied to graduate school, and so they have their own experiences to fall back on, and likely many other mentees that they have advised. So yes, I would ask anyone you think who has been through a like experience or would have some knowledge about the things that you've written about. And here's the reality, ask them. If they say no because they're too busy, you've lost nothing. So I would say yes, ask that person.
Yes.
I also would recommend that if there's anyone in your department or program that actually does graduate admissions, it would be very helpful to ask them to take a look at it as well. I think that people who have sat on multiple admissions committees have a really clear idea of what a competitive statement is, and so they will be able to, especially if they're further removed, which might not be a bad thing. So having the person Nancy talked about that is familiar with your work and your academics, it'll be great to have them to be able to sort of read through the way you've described your science and all of that. Having someone who actually does admissions to read it and say, would this catch your eye? If not, what is it lacking and how can I improve it is also another way to approach that.
Yes, and this is particularly important for MD PhD programs, where you'll find that there are multiple personal statements and each one has a different focus. So one may ask about your clinical experiences, and by that they mean your interactions with people, and another may ask about specifically about your research experiences. So it would be very helpful to have people read the statements who are familiar with the MD PhD application process. And this is another reason to start early so that you have the time to send your statements to experts for review. So we have just another minute left. I have a question here about online resources. And I know that we all recommend different resources, so we'll just go through our panel to ask. And I'll remind you all again to look at the AAMC.org website for information about both PhD programs and MD PhD programs. You will learn a lot about the programs as well as the application processes. Dave, do you have some recommendations about online resources?
Well, I'm certainly going to recommend that one that you did, the AAMC resource for the PhD and the MD PhD. And those links are a part of this slide set. So this slide set's going to be available and they can get it from there.
That's good. And Sherilyn?
Yeah, I second that, taking a look at that website. I would also say at your institutions, be sure to take a look at the graduate school and undergraduate offices that are helping you towards the next step and see if they have any workshops or seminars about applying to graduate school. A lot of schools will have very specific workshops that you'll find very helpful in this area. And again, I know a lot of students will say that sometimes they look towards students who are current graduate students and ask them if they could, take a look or see a sample of how they wrote their application essays, anything to just sort of give you an idea of the types of things that were not only recently accepted, but were very competitive as well.
Yeah. So
Yes.
Thank you all for joining us. I see that our time is up. We hope that you received a lot of information about the personal statement. We'll be repeating this webinar in the early fall, so stay tuned. If you have questions at that time, you'll be able to ask them. And again, these slides will be available very soon on the NRMN website. Good luck to all of you.